This banknote was more powerful than gold. It wasn't backed by gold. It wasn't backed by silver. Yet this simple piece of paper sent shockwaves through the world's most powerful empire, the British Empire. In the 1860s, when gold ruled global finance, the United States created a form of money that didn't rely on metal or bankers, only on state authority. This is the story of American greenbacks, the money that terrified British banks and challenged the global financial order. Back in the mid-19th century, global finance followed one unquestioned rule: gold is money. Every major currency, from the British pound to the French franc, was tied to physical gold reserves. This meant that whoever controlled the gold controlled everything else: trade, credit, and ultimately, power. And at the very center of this entire system stood London. The British Empire wasn't just a military empire built on ships and soldiers. It was a financial empire built on debt and interest. British banks were the masters of this world. They financed wars for foreign kings, funded massive railroad projects across continents, and loaned money to governments from Europe to Asia. They controlled international trade by deciding who got credit and who didn't, and as a result, a constant stream of interest payments flowed from every corner of the globe straight into the vaults of London. The United States, still a young and developing nation, was deeply entangled in this system, dependent on British capital to grow. But then a crisis erupted that would change everything. In 1861, the United States was torn apart. The Civil War began, pitting North against South, industry against plantations, Union against Confederacy. But wars are never just fought with guns and cannons. They are fought with money. The Union government, led by President Abraham Lincoln, needed unimaginable sums of cash. They had to pay hundreds of thousands of soldiers, build a modern navy from scratch, manufacture weapons, maintain thousands of miles of railroads, and supply food for a massive army. The costs were staggering. At first, the U.S. did what everyone else did. It turned to the big European banks for help, especially the powerful British financiers. The response they received was brutal. The bankers offered loans, but at extremely high interest rates, sometimes as high as 20 or 30%. And they demanded that these loans be repayable only in gold, which the Union desperately lacked. Worse, these offers came with political strings attached. Subtle pressures meant to influence the outcome of the war. President Abraham Lincoln quickly realized something deeply dangerous was happening. He famously said, or is believed to have thought, that if the Union fought the war using banker money, it might win the war on the battlefield but lose its economic independence in the process. America needed another way, a way to fund its survival without selling its future. And so, in 1862, the Lincoln administration made a revolutionary decision. It was a radical idea that would upend the entire financial world. Instead of borrowing gold from foreign bankers, the U.S. government would simply create its own money. Congress passed the Legal Tender Act of 1862, a historic piece of legislation. For the first time in modern history, a major nation issued paper currency that was not backed by gold or any precious metal. It was declared legal tender purely by the power of the state. This meant it had to be accepted for all debts, public and private, including taxes, government salaries, and everyday trade. These new notes were printed with green ink on one side to prevent counterfeiting, and they quickly earned a nickname: Greenbacks. Their value came from only one source: the full faith and credit of the United States government. This was a direct challenge to the very foundation of global banking, which insisted that only gold was real money. To the British financiers in London, greenbacks were terrifying. Not because they thought they would fail, but because they feared they would succeed. Think about it from their perspective. If a government could simply print its own money to pay soldiers, build infrastructure, and fund its operations without borrowing from private banks, then the bankers would lose their single greatest weapon: debt dependency. The entire system of global finance was built on governments needing to borrow money and pay interest. This was the source of the bankers' immense wealth and political power. British newspapers and financial journals immediately began a campaign to discredit the new American currency. They mocked greenbacks as worthless fiat paper, little more than a government IOU, They confidently predicted that this experiment would lead to runaway hyperinflation and the complete collapse of the American economy. But something entirely unexpected happened. The Union government paid its soldiers with these new paper dollars. Factories churning out weapons and uniforms accepted them as payment. The vast railroad networks that were critical to moving troops and supplies were built and maintained using them. And crucially, citizens and businesses paid their taxes in greenbacks, creating a constant demand for the currency. Now, their value did fluctuate throughout the war, often based on news from the battlefields, but the economy did not collapse. There was no hyperinflation. Most importantly, the Union won the Civil War. The United States survived its greatest trial, and it did so without surrendering its economic sovereignty to foreign debt. This success sent a shockwave of alarm through Great Britain, because if America, a rising power, could successfully finance itself this way, what was to stop other nations from following its example? If countries around the world realized they didn't need London's bankers, the global banking monopoly, the very source of British power, would be broken. While publicly dismissing greenbacks as a failed American gimmick, British financial elites were privately panicking. Historical records, like articles from the London Times and private correspondence, show intense and worried discussions in London's financial circles. One prominent British banking journal published a stark warning saying, "If this mischievous financial policy should become a settled practice, then the government will be in control of the money supply, not the banks." For the British Empire, this wasn't just a debate about economics. It was a struggle for power. Debt was the invisible chain of empire. It allowed a small island nation to control vast territories and influence governments across the globe without firing a single shot. Greenbacks threatened to cut that chain. The idea that a nation could be its own master of money was a direct threat to their entire world order. Then, in April 1865, just days after the war ended, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. In the years that followed his death, a powerful counter-movement began. The international bankers and their allies within the U.S. mounted immense pressure to dismantle the greenback system. They argued for a return to sound money, which to them meant money backed by gold and controlled by banks. Gradually, they got their way. Congress passed laws to contract the money supply, reducing the number of greenbacks in circulation. Then they passed the Resumption Act, which made greenbacks convertible to gold, effectively restoring the old system. By 1879, America was officially back on the gold standard, and the nation's monetary system was once again dominated by private banking interests. The radical experiment was over, but the idea had already been proven, and the lesson could not be unlearned. The story of the greenbacks revealed a forbidden truth, a dangerous idea that financial elites have tried to suppress ever since. It's the idea that money does not need to be backed by gold. Money does not need to be created by private bankers. All that money truly needs is the trust of the people and the authority of a sovereign state to declare it legal tender. This lesson was, and still is, incredibly dangerous to established power structures. Because at the end of the day, controlling a nation's money is the ultimate form of control. So why does this story from over 150 years ago matter so much today? Because the fundamental debate is still with us. Today, the vast majority of money in our world is not created by governments. It's created by private commercial banks every time they issue a loan. It's created as debt. Governments borrow, corporations borrow, and citizens borrow, and we all pay interest back to the banking system. Empires still rise and fall through the power of finance. But the greenbacks serve as a powerful reminder that another system is possible. A system where money is created to serve the needs of society, not a system where society is forced to serve the needs of money creators. The British Empire understood this threat immediately. That's why they panicked. So the next time you look at a dollar bill, remember this story. The British Empire wasn't just challenged by armies on the battlefield. It was shaken to its core by an idea. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more hidden histories. See you next time.